I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Jenn Rogien, the Emmy-winning costume designer of Russian Doll. And I just want to start with the fact that there was such a gap between seasons, more significant than an average show for obvious reasons. But I was curious just how much this second season felt like almost like a new production and just how much different this season was in your experience to the first one.
It was a lot of the same but different, in that the characters were familiar, the world was familiar. It's still Lower East Side New York, but then there are all of these other dimensions that were completely new, with the time travel and the girls trip and a bunch of new characters we didn't meet in season one that then factor into the storylines for this season. So it was the best of both worlds, where creatively there were some known elements, but there was a lot of new things to build or create or accomplish, and I think five different time periods total. So it kept me on my toes.
Yeah, I could certainly see that just watching the season, all these different eras. But just starting with the costumes for Nadia with Natasha Lyonne, I mean, she had that great black coat in the first season. And there's another great black coat in this second season with like the gold buttons and everything. So what went into just making that change? And also, how did you sort of land on that as almost like the signature look for her for this season?
You touched on it right there. It's really about her signatures. It's her signature
Hmm.
pieces, an amazing coat that has a tailored quality to it, the blazer, a softer blouse, the jeans and the boots. Kind of looks like a suit, kind of looks like a uniform, but each individual piece is significant for Nadia as a character. Sort of the different layers, the different, she jokes about, you don't want to peel this onion. It sort of that philosophy in wardrobe. There's a lot of layers to it. To make it a bit of armor for her, but also to keep it interesting to look at when the costumes play for such a long time, go through so much story, so much action, that the layers allow us to help tell the story of time passing. When does she have all the layers on? When is she at home? She takes some of the layers off. She does a lot of sleeping overnight and waking up. So she uses the coat as covers, as um, armor, as a way of sort of dealing with the world with a strong shoulder line and a tailored coat and a boot. And we looked at a lot of new pieces for season two that stayed in her character silhouette. It was really important that she still looked like Nadia. Yes, time has passed, but one of the things that was really important in season one is that she felt very authentic, as a New Yorker, as someone who walks a lot in New York. There's no handbag because it's not something that Nadia's not fussy that way. Everything's got pockets. So we wanted to keep all of those elements consistent and then layer in some new pieces, like a real closet. Time had passed for the character as well as for the series.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I'm also wondering about just the fit of the clothes because, she's asked to do certain action scenes at times, and she's doing a lot of moving around and very active. And, same thing also with Alan at a certain point. So I was just wondering how much the practicality of the clothes sort of factor into any adjustments you're making or any decisions.
It certainly does, especially for Nadia, where there are scenes where we're putting harnesses underneath all three layers. So how do we make sure that that works and doesn't affect the line of the clothes too much? We did a lot of fittings with a fake baby to make sure that she could tuck baby Nadia inside those coats.
Mm.
We made sure that we borrowed one of the dolls that the props team had sourced to make sure that she had that flexibility, both for comedy, but also when it would make sense for character to do that. With Nadia, we do a lot of tailoring for the line of the garments. So we slim the legs of the trousers, make everything proportionally right. It's less about the action and more about what's right for the character when it comes to tailoring for her. Similarly for Ellen, actually, Charlie's super tall, so we make sure everything looks right on him, adjusting sleeve lengths and adjusting inseam lengths and things like that. But for both of them, when it came, down to practical moments, I made sure it was me who punched the holes through all of the clothes for the stunt rigs, for the harnesses, for when they're falling through space, to make sure that they were hidden, to make sure that they worked for safety and for the stunt team, and that we could place all of the shekels through the clothes in a way that VFX could also touch them out where they needed to. So that part's kind of fun when you just literally slash through the clothes for technical reasons.
Right. I mean, well, also you touched on the different eras that we're traveling to with this season, and you do get to be very creative with certain looks to just reflect the time period. You know, we're in the 80s for a big chunk of the season, 60s, 40s. Like, I'm curious if you actually had an era there that maybe was more challenging than others in terms of finding like period specific costumes or something along those lines.
It's a really good question. The they were all challenging in their own ways. The 80s were challenging because we needed multiples on some of the things, especially for Nora, where she's physically laying on a subway platform in New York, and it's a real subway platform. So we wanted to make sure that we had ourselves covered for at least a multiple on her dresses. One of them we made. One of them I was able to source through a vintage dealer. There were some other characters that we needed bits and pieces on. Well, Ches does a lot of fun things in the episode, so we actually risked it and played with one of a kinds for him, even though his costumes played on screen for a long time. Can be a little dicey. Things from the 80s are getting to be 40 plus years old, so the fabrics dry out, the skins dry out, sometimes they can kind of fall apart on you. Thankfully, we did not have that happen. That's something I worried more about with the 60s and then back into the 40s. The 40s, we actually sourced a lot of that both in New York and in Budapest, because we shot some of that practically in Budapest. And so we did a lot of 40s clothes, and those clothes are harder to get a hold of because they're older and they don't exist as much. So with young Vera, we made her look so that we fit a 1940s dress and then reproduced it so that I wouldn't be worried about shooting New York and Budapest time period dried out fabrics and have the logistical challenges that go along with that. The 60s were fun. We worked with some of my team members had come over from Halston, so I had a real inside track into some great vintage suppliers that they had worked with on Halston. So I got very lucky to tap into their expertise and source some of Alan's grandmother's clothes from 60s. And then there's some great little spots here in New York as well. So a lot of hers was actually sourced either on the ground here, or there's a great vintage supplier out of Chicago. So different challenges for each era. Sometimes it comes down to the age of the fabric.
Did you want to touch anything at all on the 40s too? Because that's its own sort of,
yep. Lots of hats,
right.
lots of hats. That's always fun because it's something that, we now we wear a lot of beanies and baseball caps, and it's more about your favorite hat than it is about the look of the hat completing the look of the head to toe costume. So that's really fun to just actually get outside of a contemporary mindset for a minute, especially within the context of a show that is otherwise contemporary. Again, a lot of that was sourced in Budapest, and so we went to an amazing Paris Costumes, one of the great rental houses in Europe, and pulled a lot of those clothes with Paris, in addition to the ones that we sourced in New York. So yeah, it was very cool to do all 5 time periods. Sometimes it was a little bit overwhelming, I will be totally honest, to have so many time periods shooting in one day. So you're literally dressing 2022 and 1982 and 1962 or 1968 all in the same shooting day. It takes a lot of logistical forethought to basically color code everything and make sure you don't accidentally, not that would ever happen, but that you don't accidentally cross things back and forth. And one of the other great things was a uniform supplier. The 1940s stuff time period featured a lot of Hungarian uniforms, and they're very difficult to source outside of Hungary, and was very lucky to have my Budapest team put me in touch with a uniform supplier who specializes actually in Hungarian, but also European uniforms of the World War I and World War II eras. And the level of expertise was just mind-blowing, and was so grateful to have them advising and also helping us to dress extras actually on the day, because the uniforms are very old. He does recreations, but also knows the weaponry and knows the shoes, the hats, the medals, everything. And so it really was able to rely on Laszlo and his team at Ritter Uniforms for help with that very specific detail that was really important to get right in those 1944 scenes.
Wow. I mean, going to the contemporary, I wanted to also touch on Greta Lee and just her character Maxine, who we see in a few very memorable looks, I would say, just like the first season, like the pink furry coat, the kind of metallic shirt that she wears, which is kind of awesome. where did you find just like those very eye-catching outfits for her?
It sounds so lame to say all over, but that's really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I had the great pleasure of knowing what Maxine should look like since we had Greta with us season one. And so we went all over the place looking for pieces that felt like Maxine pieces. And then I did a massive edit when it all got into the shop and curated all the looks before her fitting. And then once we got into the fitting, it's very organic. Greta and I have worked together a couple of times now. And so we have a really great shorthand for, what feels right, what feels like Maxine. We have an idea of what her action might be. Greta is also just insanely aware of clothing and really understands the power and how to use the language of clothing to her advantage. And so it's really fun that to go back for a season two, already having all of that established, we could really land things very quickly. And sometimes we'd get in there and I'd start handing her an outfit, we'd break it all apart as I was taking things off the hangers, because all of a sudden it just didn't quite make as much sense on its feet as it had on the hangers. And so we just recombine things. Or even a couple of the looks I actually sent out to Natasha, and Natasha would say, well, what about this shirt with this pant? That would be amazing. And one of them, we ended up the crazy shiny PVC pant fuchsia blouse combo was a sort of paint by numbers, I like to call it, from a couple of different looks that we had also created in the fitting that ended up working brilliantly on the camera.
Definitely. And also, I mean, just one of the linchpins of the season is Ruth, who we see both in the present and the past. I'm just curious if there was any sort of initial just overall vision for sort of blending both the younger and the older Ruth, and what through lines you had for her character.
Lots of jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yep.
actually was, I'm joking, but I'm not joking in that statement jewelry is something that we had established with Elizabeth as present day Ruth as being very important to the character, to help tell her story as a bit of her way of expressing herself. And so it's something we carried back in time to the 80s with Annie playing younger Ruth. I think there's a brooch here and there. There's bigger earrings here and there. There's some buttons that are built into the clothing. I think that black dress has a button right here at the collar that we sort of played as jewelry. So that was one of the ways that we kept the through line from younger Ruth to older Ruth and vice versa. And then Ruth present day has a very specific color palette as well. It mirrors Nadia's. A lot of red, sort of it mirrors Nadia's in that it's the same colors but in the reverse. So Nadia's primarily in black. Ruth wears a lot of red and a lot of cranberry, and then Nadia is black and gray, and Ruth does a lot of black as well. And then we added some mustard in there to just get one more color that was all Ruth. And so we sort of tried to do that with young Ruth, but desaturate it for the 80s. So she wears a lot of rose, a lot of gray, a lot of camel, so that the color palettes are similar, but feels like it's been sort of aged in reverse a little bit. So we thought a lot about that. And Natasha and I talked a lot about color palette for Ruth and how to keep that through line going, because we have seen a lot of Ruth between the two seasons, and it was important that it feel right.
And it does feel right. It feels seamless. Like you just know right away that that's Ruth, I would say. So in the past, I should say. Yes. But I mean, it feels like maybe more than other series that at least I've watched this year, I feel like there's such a symbiosis just with the costumes and the hair and the makeup and the camera and obviously the actors. And I guess I'm just curious how much of a collaborative process there is, not just with Natasha, but just all the different departments, and also just how much of that was even possible considering the protocols at the time.
Right. Well, I absolutely adore Marcel. We were both back for season 2. Marcel is the head of the hair department, and is a genius in his own right. And so we talk a lot about, what vibe are you going for this character? When we go back in time, what are we trying to do? And so we talked a lot about young Ruth specifically, because that was a very specific hairstyle to go with the very specific lines of the clothing. I talked to makeup a lot, Heidi and Kabuki. Less so our camera team this year. I mean, it's a very collaborative show. You don't ever get to a look as cohesive as the show has without having strong vision from the top and talking to all of the departments across the board. So Diane Liederman and I, our production designer, talked all the time, especially about Nora's environment. making sure that the color of her walls and the color of her costume made sense. And there's sort of a nice back and forth where there's a lot of pink and rose in Nora's clothing color story, and then those really darkly saturated burgundy walls. So we talk a lot actually about the world of the characters and how the whole world looks, including the hair, makeup, and the wardrobe, but even, you know, couches and wallpaper color and wall color and all of that stuff. So it's a very collaborative environment for sure.
Yeah, and it's
COVID
very,
aside.
right, right. I mean, it really is so richly detailed that I feel like you could just watch it on mute and just like appreciate all of the design there.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you.
Well, because we're an awards website, I have to ask you about, you know, your Emmy win for the first season of Russian Doll. I know you'd been nominated before back in the day for The Good Wife, but just winning that award, especially for this show, can you speak at all to that experience and just like getting to accept that with your team?
Oh, it's wild. It's, you know, it's a once in a lifetime thing. I'm almost positive. It's so funny. I remember so little and yet so much of the evening all at the same time. I remember walking off stage and running right into a dear friend actor of mine from Orange is the New Black, which couldn't have been better if I planned it. Laverne Cox was standing right off stage. And I think I was in so much shock to have come off the stage holding an Emmy that I walked into her arms. I was so excited to see her. I remember not being able to sign my own name backstage because I was so overwhelmed with the whole experience. I mean, it's a huge room full of peer group and insanely talented artists and actors. And so the whole feeling is a little bit surreal. And I was insanely excited to be there because my assistant designer, this was the first show that she had assistant designed with me, and my wardrobe supervisor was actually retiring after our final season of Orange Together and Russian Doll. So it was really an amazing bittersweet moment to have this incredibly accomplished wardrobe supervisor and this incredibly talented young assistant designer as part of my team with me there. So it was an amazing evening. And then I got right back on a plane and went right back to work the next day. So it feels like in some ways it didn't happen because you go right back to shooting a different project the next day. But I have a wonderful little statue sitting on one of my shelves at home that there's fond memories every time I walk by it. And to be nominated and then win for a show like Russian Doll, where it is such a collaboration, is insanely rewarding because it really it made me feel like the work really got seen. And that even for a show with somewhat limited costumes, I mean, there are only a couple of changes in season one. It really was a huge compliment to the team that we really made those costumes stand out and we really made them feel like the characters. And that was the most important takeaway for me.
Wow. I mean, just listening to that, it's like past and future and present, all it's like Russian Doll, you know? Right?
Yeah.
Well, for those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews and go to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Jenn, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.